Good afternoon, everybody. Firstly, my name's Helen. I'm a careers consultant from the Career Service here at Newcastle University. Welcome to the final session of our Science Careers Outside the Lab series. So if you've been attending our sessions this week, we really hope you've enjoyed them and you found them inspirational and useful as well. So this is our final session of the series. Today's session is all about government and politics. So we've got 3 people on our panel who are all working in government organisations in policy-related roles. So before I hand over to them, just a couple of bits of information just to be aware of. So if you've been attending our events this week, this won't come as a surprise to you, but for anyone who's attending this event for the first time this afternoon, just so you're aware, we are recording the session. So there will be time at the end of the session for Q&A with our panelists. So during the Q&A, you can switch your camera on if you'd like to interact a little bit more with our panelists, but just to bear in mind that if you don't wish to be in the recording, please ensure that your camera is turned off. Now, this is a fantastic opportunity to ask our panel anything about their career experiences, top tips, etc. They're all from a science background, so they've all been in your position previously. So make use of this opportunity and do ask any questions during the session. If you have any questions during the session, please do add them to our chat box, and once all of our panel have introduced themselves, we'll get through your questions towards the end of the session. Equally, again, if you'd rather ask a question at the end by unmuting yourself, you can use the raise hand function in Zoom towards the end of the session if you prefer to ask our panel directly. So that's a little bit about how the session this afternoon will work. So we've got 3 panelists this afternoon, so Richard, Lorna and Robin. I won't introduce them myself. I'll hand over to them to deliver a really short introduction about themselves and their career experiences, and then we'll press ahead with the Q&A at the end of the session. So without further ado, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll hand over firstly to Richard. So over to you, Richard.
Hi everyone, so my name is Richard Derry. I graduated from Newcastle in 2019 with a BSc in biochemistry, and then I came back in September of 2019 to start a Masters of Research in Neuroscience. I graduated last July. My Masters research focused on searching for an early stage biomarker for Parkinson's disease. But it was made a little bit more difficult with COVID as my lab placement was cut quite short. But I've always had a kind of interest in policy, and specifically kind of science and innovation policy. And with this in mind, I started applying for the Science and Engineering Civil Service bar stream back in 2019. However, I wasn't successful at the final interview. But I was offered a place on something called the Direct Appointment Scheme. And essentially, this is a list of people who got to the final stage interview, impressed, but didn't make it onto the bar stream graduate scheme. And essentially, they send this list round, and if departments like the look of you and they want to offer you a job, they just offer you a job directly, and you start working for them without going onto the graduate scheme. So in early September time, I was offered a job by the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, also known as DCMS, as an EU exit policy advisor, which I started at the end of September last year. My role was to write briefings for the Secretary of State, for junior ministers and for senior civil servants, so that they could attend Brexit-related meetings and committees. And this was definitely a really interesting time to be involved in EU exit work, with the end of the transition period happening at the start of January. Following the end of the transition period in January, the work around EU exit sort of started to slow down, as it actually went smoother in my department anyway than we expected. And so I was moved into the international strategy team, where I've moved in February. And I now focus on bilateral engagement, specifically with countries in the Indo-Pacific, but also with Brazil and Israel, and some other sort of ad hoc stuff as well around bilateral engagement. I'm responsible for developing engagement strategies for these countries. So how do we engage with them? How do we push the UK government's point of view and get them and DCMS's priorities, and influence national governments in areas like online harms legislation, artificial intelligence, the digital and tech sector. We're also aiming to try and boost the UK's tech sector's opportunities abroad. And as well as arts and creative industries. So it's a kind of weird portfolio at DCMS. It's arts and creative industries and digital and tech, AI, 5G, that sort of thing. I'm also involved in organising ministerial visits and events, although not too many at the moment with the pandemic on. I don't know if you want some of my top tips. I've written a few down here. In terms of finding a job in the pandemic, it's a difficult one. But I would definitely just say apply to as many things as you think are interesting, because actually you might not end up in the area that you want to go into straight away. So I didn't end up in science and innovation policy, but there is so much opportunity, and especially within the civil service, to move around, to find a role that really suits you, and to then move up as well. That's probably my top tip.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Richard. And it sounds like you've had such varied experience within the civil service already, to say that you've been with them, you know, just over 6 months. It's really interesting to hear. And I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about your experiences later on in the session as well. So thank you. So moving on now to our second panelist. So over to you, Lorna.
Hi everyone, really nice to meet you all. So yeah, my name's Lorna Christie and I am one of the Physical and Digital Sciences Advisors at the Parliamentary Office for Science and Technology. So I'll just explain a little bit who POST, which is the acronym, is first, and then I'll talk a bit about my career history and how I got into that. So POST is an office that's based within the Houses of Parliament. We work across both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And our primary role is to connect up members of both houses with research evidence. There's a variety of ways that we do that. So one of the main things that we do is we focus on writing research briefings for members on different topics within science and technology and the social sciences, so that they can quickly get up to speed with the kinds of knowledge base that they need to carry out their role in the houses. Another thing that we do to kind of bring research evidence in for members is we run events. So we have quite an extensive events programme. Most of that has been virtual across the past year, as you would imagine, but that's another way that we bring in academic experts to come and talk to members of Parliament and have that kind of knowledge exchange. So my background is I did my degree in chemistry at the University of Manchester back in 2009, 2013, so quite a while ago now. And then I did a PhD at the University of Glasgow in inorganic chemistry. So it was quite fundamental chemistry that I was working on for my PhD. During that time, I realised that I kind of wanted to do something that had a bit more of a real world application, because my PhD was quite sort of fundamental, so it wasn't really very well applied in a sort of particular industry. That led me to explore what kinds of opportunities I could get involved with outside of my kind of research. So I found that POST actually run fellowships for PhD students, which I applied to and undertook back in 2015. So I worked there for a 3-month period on a parliamentary research briefing. That was on automation and military operations. So it was completely different to what I had been working on for my PhD, and completely new topic to me. I then went back to finish my PhD at Glasgow, and it just by, I guess, a bit of chance and a bit of luck, POST was actually recruiting for a physical sciences advisor on a temporary basis around the time that I finished my PhD. So I did, I think, a 3 or 4 month postdoc for a very brief stint in the research group that I was working in, and then I went on to go back to POST. To give you an idea of a kind of typical day, I guess, in my current role. So most of what I do involves kind of writing briefings for members of Parliament. So we have publications which are known as post notes, which are our main kind of flagship publication. So those are produced through doing a mixture of desk-based research, but also going out and interviewing different stakeholders to try and sort of get information about the topic. We also do quite a lot of kind of horizon scanning work to figure out what kinds of topics members might need to know about within the next kind of year or so. So keeping up to date with research developments in different fields, going to events to find out if there's anything that should be on our agenda that we're not already kind of covering. And also, like I mentioned, organising events for bringing that expertise into Parliament, and also running our fellowship scheme. So I mentioned that I participated in a fellowship scheme with my current workplace a few years ago. We run several schemes throughout the year where we bring in PhD students to come and work with us for 3-month periods. So part of my role also involves kind of coordinating those schemes as well. I'll just finish off with a top tip, like Richard did. So I think part of the one of the main things about my role is that there's a big emphasis on the ability to communicate science topics really well to a non-specialist audience. So as you can imagine, members of Parliament don't necessarily have scientific training. So when they're reading the kinds of briefings that we produce, they really need to be pitched at a level where they can quickly and easily understand the topic without being overwhelmed by lots of scientific jargon and complicated language. So I think my top tip, if you're interested in kind of doing something similar to this, would be to build on those communication skills and to make sure that you've got examples of where you can demonstrate your ability to write for a lay audience, especially when it comes to quite technical or scientific topics. So big emphasis on communication, especially written communication for that.
Thanks, Lorna. Some very sound advice there. And there are lots and lots of different ways that you can enhance your written communication skills, whilst you are still studying at university. And perhaps in the Q&A, we can ask our panel to, reflect a little bit on that and what they did themselves during their time when they were studying as well. So thanks, Lorna. Over to our third and final panelist now. So Robin, over to you.
Hi, thank you. So I am Robin. I am a government statistician. I'm badged, so I'm part of the government statistician group. I'm on the FAST stream. I'm currently in my 2nd year. So for those that don't know, the FAST stream is a leadership type program. I currently work at the Department for Education, and I rotate departments every year. So in my 1st year, I was at HMRC. I'm not directly in a policy role, but surprisingly for me, which I'm quite glad about, is a lot of the work that I do is very policy facing. So for example, when I was at HMRC, often we would get questions from policy, and we would be advising policy on what was possible, what could be done, and obviously helping them to then understand the data. So that's kind of, the main role that I'm involved with. So in terms of my background, it's quite long and varied. So yeah, I'm a bit older, I think, than the other two. So I did my undergrad in the mid-noughties, which was quite a while ago now. And I did natural sciences at Sussex University. I was also always very interested in science, but I could never quite decide what I wanted to do. So I thought natural sciences was quite a good balance because I could pick pretty much anything I wanted to do. So I started out doing physics because I used to be good at physics. Then I got a bit bored of physics. So then I did environmental chemistry, quite enjoyed that, did some interesting modules. And then I kind of got to the end of my undergrad. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. I did a gap year in the US working. Then I came back and did a master's in analytical science. And there I actually took a module on statistics, and that's kind of where I first got a real interest in statistics. And from there, it kind of developed more into a passion, but I still didn't quite know what exactly I wanted to do. So I did some science jobs. Most of them were lab-based. Some of them were research-based, away from the lab. And kind of while I enjoyed it, I found the days were quite monotonous, and some of the jobs I was doing, it was quite routine work. And while I would do a variety of things, I found it quite boring. And I wanted to get back into research. And I had a real interest in stem cells. So I applied to do a PhD at Sheffield University. And my PhD was in bone tissue engineering, and specifically looking at how we could use external mechanical forces to influence what a stem cell turns into. So whether it turns into a skin cell or a bone cell, things like that. So it was really interesting. And I think it was particularly in my PhD where I started to realize that, I should probably try and take my my career a little bit more seriously. So from here, I took every opportunity that was kind of put in front of me to better learn statistics, learn a bit of coding, improve upon my communication, obviously learn how to do presentations really well, things like that. And so from there, I was still really interested in academic research. So I went on to do a postdoctoral research position at Bart's Cancer Institute, so specifically working on ovarian cancer. And there, I really enjoyed it. I got lots of really nice papers, and I did lots of statistical analysis. And then I suddenly realized it was actually the statistics that I was really interested in. And I was one of those people that found myself creating statistics all day long for like every walk of life. So I was thinking, I need to do statistics. So I had been looking at the civil service job website for quite a while at positions, and nothing really grabbed my eye. And there was actually my wife that mentioned the fast stream to me, and she thought I'd be quite good at that. So I entered onto the fast stream. I applied 2018, and then I started my first post in 2019. So this is kind of where I am, and kind of on a day-to-day basis, what I'm doing now is, so I collect data, I produced national statistical releases, but I also have a lot of interaction with our policy colleagues, as I was mentioning before. So in my first post at HMRC, for example, I was working on personal tax policy. So basically the Chancellor's office would come to us and say, we're really interested in making this change to the tax system. Can you model it, and what will happen? And can you advise us on how it would affect certain people? So I found that really cool, really interesting. I never actually spoke directly to either of the Chancellors. They never turned up to any of our meetings, but I found that really interesting. And then it was really nice to see some of the stuff that I worked on being announced at the budget. And then my role now concerns statistics relating to all children that are taken into care in England. So it's a really important and interesting topic. And as well as doing kind of routine data collection, interacting with local authorities, I have some research projects as well, where we're looking at how can we collect more data, better include diversity and things like that. So those are kind of the main things that I do. Top tips from me. Should I give some top tips? Go for
it. Do a top tip.
So obviously I've done all kinds of stuff, and I can actually glossed over a lot of what I've done in the past, but I would just say that whatever you do, you know, do it to the best of your ability. There's always something you can learn, even if you don't necessarily see you being there. And I'll echo as well what Lorna said. The communication part is really important. So as a statistician, I'm in a position where, you know, I know the numbers and kind of all the background detail, and I have to communicate to people who aren't necessarily interested in all the background detail and can't sift through the numbers quite as well. So, you know, those communication skills are very important.
Thanks, Robin. And I think what's really interesting to kind of hear about from your experiences is the fact that your career hasn't necessarily been linear. And you've moved, you know, you've done lots and lots of different roles, you know, initially perhaps starting off thinking about academia and then obviously moving into lab-based roles. And I think that is a very important message for students that are in the call today, just to understand that the first graduate job that you take doesn't necessarily have to be the role that, you know, influences what you're going to do for life. And if you like it, fantastic, but if, you know, it's not the right thing for you, there are going to be opportunities to change role, to change organization. So I think that is really powerful, I think, coming from you and being able to sort of hear from you. So that concludes our panel introduction. So now, students, it's over to you. So now is basically your chance to ask our panel anything about their experiences. Feel free to ask general questions if you'd like different panel members to respond to those, but equally, if there are specific questions that you'd like me to direct to a specific panel member, please do let us know as well. I can see that we have a question already from Grace, so I'll start with Grace's question. So are there any particular skills you gained from a science background which you feel made you particularly suited for a role in government and policy? So I know we've talked a lot already perhaps about the communication side of things, but aside from the communication side of things, what kind of skills do you feel that you developed from your science background that you feel has perhaps been advantageous in your current role? So perhaps, open the floor for any of our panelists to jump in here.
I'm happy to jump in. So I think critical thinking, so everything I do has to be evidence-based, and that might sound funny because surely everything should be evidence-based, but we're the ones that are kind of really looking at the raw numbers, and we have to make decisions, and sometimes very fast. Particularly in my last role, I sometimes would get a call and I would have half a minute to run some analysis, summarize, and get it back to a minister. So critical thinking, and then being able to just kind of plow through all the detail and find the most important information as quickly as possible. And I've had a lot of experience, but I think there's lots of scenarios, particularly relating to science, where you have the opportunity to kind of develop those skills.
Thank you. Would Richard or Lorna, would either of you like to jump in and add anything else here?
I would definitely agree with Robin there. I think there's something in, especially for me, in a kind of non-sciencey role, there's something in having that kind of science background that makes me think differently to a lot of people around me. There's a kind of, the way that you look at things with that kind of critical eye is definitely something that isn't kind of necessarily a skill that everyone has. And I think, Robin, I think maybe one of the things that I didn't have before I started in the civil service, that is something that kind of happens on a day-to-day basis, is that kind of speed of turnaround, that being able to do something really quickly. I definitely didn't have that when I started, but I definitely have it now after kind of being asked to do a briefing within 45 minutes for a minister. That's something that I've learned, but using all of those skills, the critical thinking, the kind of being able to distill really complex information into something really readable and engaging, and bring out the most important details from it. All of those skills that you learn as a scientist, you can kind of translate into the role, definitely.
Thank you. And I think it sounds like that sort of ability to create briefing documents very quickly at the drop of a hat is quite common, across the different roles that you're sort of working in. I'll move on now to another question. So we have a question for Lorna from Josie. So Josie's asking if there are any opportunities to work at post without a PhD. So I was wondering if you could perhaps tell us a little bit more about the type of skills and perhaps academic experience that post look for, and perhaps a little bit more about the colleagues that you work with. Are they all from a PhD background, or all of them scientists even perhaps as well, to add to that?
Yeah, definitely. So there isn't actually a requirement to have a PhD to work in post or in other roles in Parliament, which are similar. So I can talk a bit more about those if that's of interest. But so I think the majority of people who are in my team, and we're quite a small team, I think there's about sort of 10 advisors in total. The majority do have PhDs, but it's not a requirement. I think that probably the kind of skills that you gain through being able to kind of appraise research evidence, and that kind of familiarity you get with looking at academic literature, probably helps in the role, in that we work quite closely with the kind of academic literature generally, and kind of being able to keep up to date with kind of sort of research developments on that side. I think the actual requirement for a role at post is basically a degree. So I think the more important thing is that you are able to demonstrate your ability to, and this comes back to some of the skills that we've already been discussing, but that ability to kind of collate evidence from lots of different sources. So the ability to do that quickly as well. That's something that Robin mentioned, being able to kind of go in and quickly scan reports and be able to extract the key points. That's a really important skill to have. Communication skills that we've already discussed. And also, I think the ability to kind of go out and talk to people, and having good interpersonal skills is quite a key one for the role as well. So part of writing our briefings is that we go out and actually interview lots of different stakeholders who work in the area that we're writing on. So the ability to actually go out and interview people, talk to people and get information from them is also really important. So yeah, no requirement to have a PhD. I think most of the staff do, but some don't. And yeah, I think the skill set is probably the more important thing there.
Thanks, Lorna. That was a really comprehensive answer, so thank you. Really interesting question now from Finn, who's asking, I'm presuming this is a question to all of our panel, do you find it difficult to work in government if you disagree with policies?
I'm happy to take this.
Yeah.
I think you have to, when you start working, especially for the civil service, because the civil service is impartial. We are not elected, the ministers are elected, and they're the ones that ultimately make the decisions. And we can come in and propose options, we can put the evidence behind them down on paper and show it to the ministers, but ultimately it's not our role and it's not our place as unelected officials to make those decisions and agree with them or not. I think for me, I've seen it definitely in my team when working on Brexit policy. People disagree with it, obviously, as sort of 52-48 split across the country, and that's not any different across the civil service. But everyone in the civil service is so professional, and they understand this kind of, that it is the minister's job because they are the ones that have the mandate, and it's not our job to kind of bring our personal politics into it. We are just there to deliver what the ministers and the government of the day decide.
Thanks, Richard. Would Robin, Lorna, would either of you like to add anything to this one?
Yeah, I would just add that, so for me, I'm in a different position to the other two panelists because I'm working for Parliament rather than the government. So I think in that sense, the definitely the impartiality stuff still stands. We have to, because our products and our briefings are going out to all members of Parliament, no matter what the political party, it's really important that we're not taking a political side in the things that we write, and that's something that we pay a lot of attention to all the time in our briefings. So they're supposed to be a purely just a summary of the evidence in an area rather than sort of swaying one way or the other. And in addition to not being politically well, in addition to being politically neutral, they also need to be kind of scientifically neutral as well. So we don't actually make recommendations in our briefings, you know, to say like, oh, you should pursue this policy angle because the science says this. It's very much, we're just presenting the facts, and then we sort of pass that over to members of Parliament to read that, absorb that, and do with that what they want to do. So it is, I would say it's a challenge in that part of, so in the role, I'm often kind of working in topics or in areas that I'm not necessarily that familiar with. So which is an opportunity in that, you know, the role is very varied and interesting, and I'm working on a different topic kind of fairly frequently. But what it does mean is that when I go and work on something new, I just have to be really aware of where the balance is and where the scientific consensus is in that topic area, and just to make sure I'm accurately getting that across in the things I write, because then obviously that's going to be read by members who need to have a really sort of neutral and balanced piece of research on the topic. So yeah, it's a challenge, but I think we sort of, it's definitely high up our priority list to make sure that all our briefings are impartial.
Thanks, Lorna. Thank you. Got a question from Holly now, who's asking, perhaps if I maybe direct this to Richard and Robin, any particular challenges that you found when you were searching for a career, you know, thinking about your roles currently, any challenges that you found, perhaps both looking for opportunities as well as during the application process? I think it might be quite useful for students to hear a little bit more about what you experienced during the application process.
So when I was looking originally for statistics positions in particular, I think I was a little bit put off by the criteria for being a statistician. So while I was quite confident in my statistical abilities, like most jobs, you know, you have a kind of checklist of essential desirable skills, and I guess I'm more one of these people where I feel like if I don't meet a high percentage of it, I'm going to struggle. And, you know, there might be other people like that. There might be other people that aren't like that. But I think, you know, jobs come in waves, and you just need to keep an eye out for something that takes your fancy. What I will say is when it comes to getting a job in government, and particularly if you're going to be working at a more senior level, it takes a while before you start because you need security clearances and things like that. So for example, when I applied for the fast stream, I wasn't really aware that it would take nearly a year to start, after which I passed the scheme. And part of that is to allow kind of everyone who's eligible to get the required security clearance so that you can, work on various sensitive materials. Now, that's not to say that if you don't meet all the criteria and you don't get that clearance, that you can't, work on the fast stream or anywhere else. But what will happen is there'll be certain areas where you have to be escorted and things like that. So I think, so for me, it's just don't be afraid, like just go for it and just be aware that, it tends to be a bit of a long process. It's not like a interview one day and then get the job, start next day.
I would definitely echo that point about being a long process. I started looking for jobs in policy after my BSc, so that was in 2019, and I sort of was rejected from all of them. I was applying to charities, I was applying to research bodies, everything really. And then after my master's, I again was applying to all the same places, even more, and getting pushed back a lot. And I think one of the things that I found that was definitely really challenging was actually just being able to push through and keep sending out those applications and keep kind of putting everything into each application, because you might just get an email back saying, sorry, we're full, or sorry, we don't want you, or whatever. And I think by about this time last year, I was really, really kind of down on it. I was very, very tired of the whole process. I've been applying everywhere. I basically felt like I wasn't ever going to get a job. And with the pandemic, I was like, I'm definitely never going to get anything. And then something pops up, and that's what happened with this. It sort of popped up out of the blue. I got an email, and they said, would you like the job? And I said yes. And so I think perseverance is definitely something that you need to keep in mind, and keep in mind that it might not be you apply for the job and you get it. It's going to be a difficult kind of process. You just have to keep pushing through and just have to keep kind of putting everything into each and every application you make.
I would definitely agree with that. And I think resilience to rejection, as sad as it sounds, is actually really important, because I actually also applied to the fast stream and got rejected from that. And one of the feelings I had afterwards was I've put so much work into that application, not just kind of preparing for the interview and for the assessment centre in terms of, practicing writing and things like that, but also the emotional investment. So it was quite, getting knocked back is actually quite hard, because you think about the work that you've put in to get to that place, or the work that you've put in for the application. One thing I would say is that I ended up in a situation where I was I still do have lots of folders on my laptop where I was storing all the application answers that I wrote, so I could not recycle them, but so I had a catalogue of answers to different questions. It was all very, very organised, but also asking for feedback on that as well. So just making sure that some places can't give feedback because they have so many applications, and that's sometimes that is an issue. But if you get to the stage where you've had an interview, normally you should be getting feedback from that, so you know where to improve, and then you can sort of build on your experience through the application process previously, and hopefully improve for next time. So definitely save all your application stuff, ask for feedback, and then you'll know which areas you can improve on as well.
I've still got all those applications. They're on my computer.
I feel like go for it.
I think another thing I would say is that the government and Parliament, I know we're all, us panelists are all sitting here, either work for the government or work for Parliament, but there are policy roles in kind of lots of different areas that you might not think of. So charities a lot of the time have policy professionals. I know I applied for the Wellcome Trust, I applied for Cancer Research UK, Alzheimer's Research, they have policy professionals. If you look at places like the Royal Society of Chemistry, they also have policy professionals. So this idea that if you want to do policy, you have to go into the government is not necessarily the case. And there are so many opportunities out there. You just need to look and find and kind of apply, basically.
That's definitely true. I was also going to say that there's quite a lot of roles in kind of knowledge exchange or impact manager type positions, which I think have they seem to have exploded in the past 5 years, but they're kind of roles where you'd perhaps be working in a university, but you'd be responsible for sharing the results of research projects with wider audiences beyond just the university. So kind of making sure that the research has policy impact in some way, and perhaps that involves things like responding to government consultations or kind of making sure that research is fed into Parliament as well. So I think that's also something that's definitely got similar skills to these sorts of jobs, which are worth checking out.
Yeah, great point. And I know within Newcastle University specifically, we have research impact officers in all of the 3 faculties in the university. And we also have, people working in policy-related roles, who maybe sit centrally within the university as well. And, Newcastle will be no different to other universities, particularly research-intensive universities. They are going to have, these policy and research impact teams. Another few questions sort of just come through the chat. So Mel is asking, did you all give a huge amount of thought into work placements while at university? And perhaps to maybe extend that question a little bit, so all of our students have got the opportunity to undertake a 9 to 12 month placement after their penultimate year of undergraduate study. I'm assuming that Mel is sort of referring to a kind of 9 to 12 month work placement, but I suppose equally, how much thought did you give to gaining experience while you were still studying, particularly thinking about what you were saying about the importance of communication skills? Did you honestly give that, a lot of thought to that? Did you sort of try and look for work experience opportunities that were going to perhaps develop those skills whilst you were studying? I guess that's for anyone to say.
I didn't give a huge amount of thought into it. So I did a 3-month internship between my 2nd and 3rd year, but I was working at a pharmaceutical company doing regulatory affairs. So it's sort of similar, you're involved in kind of looking at legislation and stuff like that, but it's not hugely policy specific. I think the closest I got to a policy specific thing was a week at a think tank when I was 15. So there's no kind of, especially going into the civil service and especially the fast stream, there's no kind of prerequisite for what you need for what skills. When I went for the fast stream, specifically the science and engineering scheme, there was maybe more of a kind of need to have a background in science, definitely. But as a civil servant, you are expected to be a generalist, and you're expected to kind of be able to pick up jobs here and there, and they might not be within your skill set or your knowledge base. And so actually, having that experience of something like a pharmaceutical company helps you with the skills that actually you can use to transfer to any kind of job within the civil service.
Thank you. How about you, Robin? Were you kind of almost prepping, and starting to plan when you were kind of doing your PhD? Were you thinking about kind of developing yourself in this way?
Yeah, so I probably during my undergrad didn't take things very seriously. I was more interested in going out and playing football. But when I came back to do my master's and kind of was reflecting on my life, I started to take things much more seriously. Number one, I went to all my lectures. And number two, because at that point I was starting to get quite interested in kind of analysis, I managed to get myself a summer placement at a pharmaceutical company as well, doing analysis of historical data. And that was the first time as well I kind of wrote a really comprehensive report. So this was to the MHRC. And from there, then I really started to think about everything I did. Now, okay, I said that my career path hasn't been very linear, but I think, like I was saying earlier, I've always taken everything that I've done very seriously and looked at what I can learn from it and what I can translate. So I think, yeah, if you get the right placement, it can obviously help you move into that position that you want, perhaps a bit quicker, but getting the right placement doesn't mean that you're not going to get there. There's no time frame on it really. Could I have got onto the fast stream before I reached my 30s? I don't know. I have no idea. but I don't like to dwell on the past either. But I do think now I'm doing really well because I've had all these experiences. And I think, like I say, just gather as many experiences as you can, and I think you'll get to where you want to go if you just kind of keep on track.
Thank you. So I think that's all the questions in the chat, but students, if you'd like to ask our panel any questions, we have got about another 10 minutes, so please do write your questions in the chat if you have them. Equally, please feel free to raise your hand, and Ange and I will look out for to unmute you. I suppose a question for the panel from me then, while all of our student questions have been answered. What are the opportunities for progression like within your organisation? So this is a common question that we receive from students who are keen to understand a bit more about development and progression opportunities in the roles of our panellists. So I was wondering if perhaps all of you could just reflect a little bit on where you see the progression opportunities in your role.
It is quite difficult for me to say because I've only been in the job for 6 months. But from what I hear, there is a lot within the civil service. The civil service is absolutely massive. And there are so many jobs across so many different areas and so many kind of opportunities for progression and learning new skills and learning and development and stuff like that. So within the civil service, there is definitely a huge amount. For me personally, I would really love to kind of move across to science and engineering, science and innovation policy. That's kind of where my heart is set at. But the kind of culture of the civil service is one of generalism, and so being able to pick something up and learn new things kind of at the drop of a hat. And one day you could be working on tourism policy and the next you're working on nuclear submarines or something like that. So that kind of, there's so much opportunity to move and do new things, and then ultimately in the long run you move up that kind of career ladder. And then once you're kind of moving up, there's also opportunities open up outside of the public sector. So from what I hear from my colleagues, people kind of look to you and go, oh, it'd be really useful within the private sector. And so kind of going into the public sector and the civil service really doesn't kind of narrow down your options at all. It kind of expands them more than you think.
Thank you. Robin, Lorna, anything to add here?
Yeah, I mean, I really back up what Richard's saying with just because you enter the civil service doesn't mean you're in the public sector for life. If anything, from what I've seen and experienced, there's more learning that can be done here than anywhere else. There's such a wide range of roles, different departments. I mean, for me, currently as a statistician, I'm part of the analysis function, which includes economists, social researchers, operational researchers, data scientists. I can easily glide across all of those. I can move into policy roles if I want. I know people on my scheme who have recently switched to become generalists so they can do policy. There's so much learning, and you have this kind of structure where you can keep progressing up, and it's kind of, once you're in the civil service, unless you're truly terrible, I guess, at your job, or you're not impartial and kind of living up to that civil servant code of conduct, you're guaranteed pretty much a job for life, and you can choose at what pace you go at. If you don't want to progress all the way to the top, you don't have to, and you can keep moving. So yeah, I mean, I would just back up exactly what Richard was saying, really.
Thank you. Kate in our chat box is asking a question as to whether international students are able to apply for roles within government civil service.
I think so. I'm not entirely sure. I've got international colleagues, but you would have to check out on the website, because it could be that certain roles aren't open to foreign nationals, but I'm pretty sure you can.
Yeah.
I think for parliaments, the requirement to pass security clearance is that you have to have lived in the UK for 2 out of the last 5 years. So I don't really know any more than that. I think there's certain like security clearance elements to that, but I think other than that, if you are a resident in the UK, then I don't think it's an issue.
And I'd maybe just add to that usually on the gov.uk website, they're usually providing lots of information about the application process and eligibility. So we'd always kind of point you in that direction for the particular role that you're applying for, because usually there'll be some kind of statement about your eligibility and whether they're accepting you know, applications from international candidates as well. Perhaps one final question from me. Oh no, we've got another question just come through. So in your opinion, what do you think makes an ideal applicant in terms of perhaps non-degree related skills and experiences? Great question.
I would say having a very open mind, being very impartial, willing to listen to both sides of the argument, processing everything, using the evidence, and just, you know, being a very clear and confident communicator. I think those are things, you know, we can learn from many different, you know, walks of life. And I think if you've kind of got those skills as your foundation, then, you know, you can do very well, I think.
Thank you. And before we finish, I've just got one last question for our panel. So what has been the most interesting thing that you've worked on in your role? I get that, you know, there's maybe a degree of confidentiality here that you might not be able to tell us everything, but that you're able to tell us, what's been the most interesting projects that you've worked on?
I can go first if that's helpful. So the best thing I've ever worked on in post was when I met David Attenborough as part of an event that I was organising, and I met him in person at the event, but also was speaking to him on the phone as part of organising it. So I think for me that was an absolute career highlight. Nothing has topped that. I don't think it ever will either, but that was absolutely brilliant. So I think that's one of the things that I think generally is really exciting and about my job, is that part of it is going out and speaking to people who you perhaps wouldn't normally have the access to speak to. And in this case, because it was a prestigious event in Parliament, which I was organising, I did get a chance to speak to someone, national treasure, David Attenborough. So yeah, that was definitely my career highlight.
Lorna, I feel like if this were a competition, you'd have won that right there. But Robin and Richard, we have to listen to your most interesting experiences too, obviously.
I'm not sure I can top that. I'm trying to think. Maybe the eve of the end of the transition period was an odd one. I was sort of sitting at home with my family on New Year's Eve, checking my work phone to see if anything was going to kick off or anything exciting was going to happen. That was kind of cool to know that, you know, all the work that I've been doing and all the briefings and all the things that I've been seeing and all the papers that have been coming through me were ultimately put into practice, and you know, on the 1st of January it was all kind of, yeah, new and exciting. That's probably my highlight. Yeah,
so seeing the impact, a real impact in terms of what you've done. Yeah, great. And Robin?
Yeah, I mean, mine's very similar to Richard. I mean, I certainly can't top Lorna. My career's been way more boring. Yeah, I think I mentioned it earlier, some of the policies that I worked on, and then seeing them, you know, actually announced in the budget by the Chancellor. It's quite a cool moment, because, you know, you do so much work in the background leading up to that, and, you know, you influence it in the sense that, you know, this is the data, I produced it, and I have to make sure I clearly communicate my message. And then I feel that, you know, if the Chancellor is then saying all the right things, then I'm you know, really pleased that I've done my job. So, and also actually, because I've been based in Manchester, so the HMRC building in Manchester is not very pleasant. So I used to travel down to the one in Westminster, which I think is next door to your building, Lorna. That was always a highlight for me, traveling down there. So I kind of miss that.
Yeah, I think Lorna still wins, no offence, but David Attenborough was slightly more impressive than the building, but still okay. And we have actually got a couple more questions that have just come in, if our panelists are okay to just stick around for another few minutes. So Mel is asking, you know, how important do you feel it is to network on things like LinkedIn, and has that actually been useful for your own careers?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn's great. Personally, when I was applying for jobs, I was LinkedIn messaging. I downloaded LinkedIn Premium for a bit, which was maybe a bit of a waste of money, but I was messaging people from loads of different places, and what I was trying to do was find people that had gone to Newcastle, and that's your kind of in. So you say, oh, you're also a Newcastle alumni, I'm looking for a job, can you give me any advice, tips, whatever? And some of them don't come back to you, some of them do, and they come back with really interesting stuff and really useful information. And yeah, some people anyway are really keen to help you on LinkedIn. So that's definitely a kind of top tip for me, would be use LinkedIn as much as possible.
Yeah, and that's how I actually sourced Richard for this session. So I actually was looking up some of our Newcastle graduates who were working in policy related roles, and I came across Richard's profile, sent him a message, and he kindly obliged, so thanks. So yeah, very useful. Lorna Robin, anything to add here?
I didn't really use LinkedIn very much until the past year or so, actually. So I didn't really use it kind of for job hunting, but what I have found it really useful for is maintaining my networks that I've made in my role. So I have a group with other sort of people working in science policy on LinkedIn, and that's a great way to stay in touch with them. So I think probably I didn't utilize it as much as I could have done earlier on when I was job hunting, but now that I'm kind of more established in the role I'm in, I think it's been great for kind of keeping in touch with people and also finding people. So sometimes if I've needed to speak to someone as part of a project or find some expertise in a government department or a particular industry, I've found people through LinkedIn as well, so it can be quite useful on that front. So yeah.
Thank you. We've just got a quick question from E, who's asking, how competitive are applications for the positions? I get that, you know, as recruiters, as you're not all recruiters, you might not necessarily kind of know, but any kind of ballpark kind of figures?
I think it's quite difficult to say for post staff, because I guess there's not a massive staff turnaround at post, so we don't often sort of recruit for new advisor roles like my role. I can sort of speak a bit about the fellowship. So the PhD fellowships that we have different schemes that run throughout the year, and they kind of vary in how competitive they are actually. So it depends how widely open they are. So we've got a scheme opening in a couple of weeks' time, which is our Royal Society of Chemistry Fellowship schemes. That's funded by them to come and work with us for 3 months. And that one's fairly competitive because it is open to quite a wide pool of candidates. You just have to be a Royal Society of Chemistry member to apply. So that means that quite a lot of people can qualify for that one. Others are a bit less competitive, so maybe a sort of 25 to 30% success rate for some of those ones. So I'd say it's a bit of a mix. Sorry, that doesn't really answer the question very directly.
No, and I think that's a very fair answer. I think it's probably, Richard and Robin, it's probably hard for you guys to say as well, other than that it is competitive.
Yeah, it is competitive. Robin can probably talk a bit more about the fast stream specifically, but from what I saw, it was competitive, but there are a lot of roles within the civil service. It is a enormous organisation, and you know, although it is competitive for each role, there are a lot of them. And I think my example of going onto trying to get onto the fast stream and not quite getting there, but still being offered a job, shows that actually, you know, it is competitive, yes, but there are kind of, if you kind of reach a standard, there are still roles out there for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for students who are interested, I'd recommend having a look at the civil service jobs website, because there are usually loads and loads of opportunities. Yeah. So it isn't just the fast stream. That's not the only route into the civil service. I think that's a really important point to perhaps take away. And then final question from Edward / comment that some of you may have read already. Is it a requirement to have watched the thick of it before joining as prep for the job? There were a few nods there.
Multiple times, I think. I don't know if
So-
Robin agrees, but I've heard people say that Westminster is like the thick of it, except in the thick of it, no one goes around saying this is just like the thick of it.
I've definitely heard that, yes.
So there
The
you
more
go.
you watch it, the better your chances get.
That's your question, Edward, answered. So thank you so much for all of our panel for answering all of the questions. I think we've managed to get through all of them now. So thank you, students, for your questions. And thank you to our panelists for answering those so candidly. I've just got a couple more slides just to go through before we wrap up. But before that, I think, can we all just say a massive round of applause to Richard, Robin and Lorna? It's been absolutely fantastic. I think all of our students, reading through the chat box here, thank you messages coming through, we really value the insight that you've been able to provide us with this afternoon. So thank you so much for your time. And just before we finish, students who've been involved in our sessions already this week, just to let you know that we've got lots and lots more information on the Career Service website about science careers outside the lab. So we've got advice on different roles, we've got advice on gaining experience in lots of different areas outside the lab, as well as tips on finding opportunities as well. And if ever you'd like to talk things through with us, whether that's you're undecided about pursuing a lab-based career, or you're not sure whether to stay in academia or move over to industry, or if you'd like applications checking, if you'd like advice on finding opportunities, interview coaching, all that kind of stuff we can help you with. So get in touch with us through logging into My Career, and you can book appointments with our team. So we've got lots and lots of bookable appointments available Monday to Friday, 11 until 5, if you'd like that support. So thanks once again for our panel. For students who are still here, we'd love it if you wouldn't mind just completing a really, really short poll just to get some feedback about how you found the session. Equally, I can see in the chat box that there are lots of students that have attended a number of these sessions this week. We're recognising your names here. So if you have any feedback about the sessions in general, Ange and I would absolutely love to hear your feedback. So feel free to send me an email, or equally if you have any feedback in the chat that you'd just like to provide, we'd love to hear it. So that concludes our Science Careers Outside the Lab event series. So we hope that you've enjoyed the sessions this week. We hope you found them useful. I think today's session's not just been insightful, but it's been entertaining as well. So thank you to all of our panelists once again. I'll end the poll now. Fantastic.